Dickey here. And one of the questions I get is $1 million enough for me to retire? And I hate to be this way, but you're going to get all these things online that'll tell you yes, no, maybe, whatever. The answer is maybe. The answer isn't maybe because I'm trying to be a jerk about it. The answer is really, what do you want out of your retirement? Depending on what other investments that you have, whether you have a company or how much you need to live and live the life you want to live, is depending on whether $1 million is going to be enough. And again, that number is not the important part. The important part I want you to think about is what's called the sequence of returns. And that's when you're pulling your money out in the market. And it is really the biggest problem I see in most financial plans that I see from other advisors and that I see from people online that tell you how to do things. So let's start with this video here, and I'll really show you why it's a problem.
Today's question of the day comes from Tony in Michigan. He says, I'm 56 years old and have no debt. I have 1.4 million in the bank and want to know how much is enough for me to feel comfortable retiring. 1.4 million sounds like a lot, but I don't have a good handle on how long that would last. That's a really good question, Dave, and I feel like a lot of people kind of have that thought in their mind. Got this money, how do I know if it's enough? How do I know if I can retire or when I can retire? And I feel like it's more about being able to and being happy with living off the interest. So if you looked at 1.4 million and it's invested, let's say that you're averaging a 10% rate of return, are you?
First of all, I don't know an investment that gives you a 10% dividend or interest consistently. That's a guarantee or that you can count on. Now, I know she's talking about the stock market and she's other things. So we'll come back to this in a second because I got another video here.
That you want to stay away from, and you need to look at your rate of return. So if you're invested in good growth stock mutual funds that are averaging what the stock market has averaged, the stock market has averaged 11.8% since it began, the Standard & Poor. Okay? So let's just pretend you're making 11%. We'll round down for the people that go bananas when I start talking about this stuff. All right, so we're going to round down. You're making 11%. All right, if you left 3 in there, that would so that it would grow a little bit to cover some inflation, and pulled off 8, that means you'd be living on $90,000 a year.
Okay, so now he's saying 8%. Now, the reason I want to say this is a problem is that you're hoping that the market goes up and does what its average has been. Now, I can't tell you how many times I've had a client come in and go, well, I retired and the market crashed. And before you tell me this is never going to happen and the average is whatever it is, I got it. But what I want you to focus on here is that if you retired on January 1 of 2000, the end of the year, 99, and we just come off several years. I mean, look at these years. Basically, you hadn't had a loss pretty much the whole decade. I mean, look at this. 1990 was the only year it was a negative. 37, 9, 1, 3, 30, 22, 33, 28, 30. Why would you think it's going to go down? Well, maybe because it's due. I don't know. But the point is that what I'm going to show you actually happens. And these are annual returns. This doesn't mean that it doesn't happen on an individual basis. Because, I mean, a lot of times, same thing when you buy a stock. You can buy it on a specific day. And that when you take the annualized return on a stock, that doesn't mean you bought it on that January 1 and you sold it on the next year in the exact time frame. So when I talk about sequence of returns, what I'm saying is if you retired on January 1 of 2000, the next year it lost 9%. Then it lost 11. Then it lost 21. What does that mean in the scheme of things? And what it means is if you took their example and you had your 1.4 million and you got your 10% return, but you're in 2000, so it's January 1, you take out your 140 grand because you're trying to budget. So you're saying, okay, I can live off $140,000 on my 1.4 million. That's 140 grand. And again, that's not 10% of whatever the value is. You're putting a budget together for the rest of your life. So you're going to plan to pull out 140 grand for the rest of your life, and hopefully more, because according to Dave, if you do it 8%, it'll work different. But I'm going to start with the 10%. And this is what I mean by the sequence of returns. If you take out the 140,000, you get 1.2 million, 1.26 million left. You lose 9%. So you start the next year at 1.146 million. You take out your 140,000. Now you're down to a little over a million. You lose another 11%. So now you're down to 886,000. You take out another 140,000, down to 746. You lose another 21, almost 22%. and you're down to 587,000, you take out 140 grand. Basically, if you'd done this on January 1, you'd be out of money before the financial crisis loss. I mean, during it, you'd be done. You're out. You're not even 10 years into retirement and you're out of money. Now, let's go to Dave's number and let's throw the 8% in here. Now, that's significantly better, but you're still only getting to 2010. Again, before you tell me this can't happen, it literally did happen. These are the returns from the S&P 500 over that time period. Now, my problem with what he's saying is that you're putting together this portfolio. He talks about a growth portfolio. Are you telling me that you're recommending that somebody who's in retirement doesn't change their portfolio and just puts into a portfolio that's following the S&P 500 or is in your growth portfolio you've talked about? I mean, I'm sorry, but that's just ridiculous. Now, most advisors right now are talking about 3.5%. Now, if you do a 3.5% return, granted, it ramps up to 4%. I get that. Now, you really don't have a problem here. You can run through the roughshod and you can run through the deal at 3.5%. I started off with 5%. I still don't know that 5% is a problem in general, because again, you're talking about one of the worst time periods in the history of the stock market, and that, the 5% works. But the bigger question is 5% going to work for you? Now, again, if you want to go in there and you want to have a pay increase, how's that going to work for you? Because again, this is talking $70,000, assuming inflation doesn't go up. So what you have to take into consideration is when you're retiring, how your money is set up. So again, let's say this is all in an IRA. Well, you got to pay tax on all that money that you're pulling out. So that's one issue. Are you retiring at 59 and a half, or are you retiring at 70? How long do you need the money to last? Part of it is how much, do you want to leave behind? I've got some clients that don't have children, couldn't care less if there's a penny left behind. I've got other clients that want to make sure that whatever they start with, their kids get. If they start with 1.4 million, they want to make sure the 1.4 million gets to them. So again, it's not a simple answer, and it's not as simple as saying that over the course of time, the portfolio returns 11%. Because again, what I'm trying to show you here is since 2000, it's only averaged an 8% return. And if it's averaging an 8% return, as we said, you're out of money in year 10. Again, this is what has actually happened. Now, does that mean it's going to happen going forward? No. And could I change the dates? Yes, I could change them. But I think it is wrong for anyone to sit down and say, just simply, let's do 10%, let's do 8%. And I continuously hear this from guys like Dave Ramsey and, the other gal that was on there with him. And not just them, but I see TikTokers and all this kind of stuff. It's not that simple. And again, how do you pull the money? Now, if you're going to be far more involved in how the portfolio is run, and if you have a portfolio that starts off that and you're going to be in there and you're going to say, if it goes up this much, you're going to sell it. But, most people do exactly what I'm showing here. And most advisors do the same thing, where they'll sit back and say, okay, on January 1, we're pulling out whatever, 112,000 in this case. And every January, they're going to pull that out, regardless of what the portfolio is. Now, if you were being more managed on it and you were handling it yourself rather than an advisor or other things, and if you could just literally get an 11% return or even an 8% return every single year rather than having losses, that would work, but it doesn't work. So I know other guys that have gone out there and they've made portfolios like this. And what they do is when the portfolio is up 10%, we'll say, they sell off enough for the next year and they put it in a separate account, just leave it in a money market or something so that it's ready for the next year. Even if there are ups and downs, they took the money out when the portfolio was up so that you're not pulling out when the market is down. And again, that can be done too. But again, it's far more complicated. You're actually selling mutual funds at a time. And again, you're assuming, is this an IRA? Is it not an IRA? Because if it's not an IRA, then you've got to deal with capital gains on this stuff, in addition to, and taking losses. So again, it's not as simple as sitting back and saying, hey, can you live off of 10% or 9% or 8% or even 5%? To me, the more important thing is actually sitting down with an advisor and putting a plan together that works for you to say, okay, I'm going to retire at 60. And at 60, I'm going to need this much money. And, in this particular case, let's say you can do $100,000. Okay, if you're retiring at 60 and it's you and your spouse, and there's two of you, well, guess what happens when you turn 67 or 62, depending on when you want to do this. But if you're not working, which is the other question I always get from people. Should I take Social Security early? The question to me, the answer is really simple. If you're not going to work and have an earned income after 62, or when you take Social Security early, take it early. If you're going to continue to work, then you don't take it at 62, you wait till 66 and a half or 67 or whatever your magic date is. But to me, that actually adds into where you're at here. You can make this work because now you get a pay increase down the road, or you can not pull as much from your investments when you get to that age, which to me is a smarter choice, is actually putting the plan together to say when I want to pull off of it, which is why I typically tell people you need to have 3 buckets when you're getting ready to retirement. You have your 401k or your tax deferred, you have your Roth IRA, which is your tax free, and then you have your taxable. And if you have those 3 buckets, as an advisor and as yourself, you can decide when you're pulling what from where, because there's things that the budget doesn't actually put into consideration. Am I going to need a new refrigerator? Am I going to need a new roof? Am I going to need a new car? And all that stuff gets put into it should be put into a plan with a financial advisor, and you can kind of plan that stuff out. And when you're getting closer to retirement, let's say you're 55 years old, you can start planning as to whether, if at 60 I'm going to do this. Okay, how old is my roof? How old is my furnace? How old is my car? Do I plan while I'm working so that when I actually retire, I have, the newest car that I want to have at that time, so that I've got 5, 10 years or whatever it's going to be before I need another car. And then it's that part of my budget. So again, it's not as simple as just saying, I'm going to take 8% out. And yes, it would be nice to have a pay increase. Now, there are some of us who actually have portfolios and programs that don't just hope that the market's going to go up 11%. They actually have things that make sense and that are going to make these things work for you. So, and you got to remember, back then, you didn't have interest rates like you've got today. You couldn't get a 5% return. You couldn't get a 6% return. And then you've got some clients that, don't care if there's anything left. They don't care if there's anything left. There's other options to get the money out with that. So again, keep an eye on sequence of returns, because it's far more important, in my opinion, for the long-term success of your plan. Because again, in this particular case, again, this does not take into consideration interest or inflation. And if you're doing an 8% withdrawal, you're done in 10 years. If you're doing the 10% withdrawal, you're done in 8 years. And again, don't tell me it can't happen. It did happen. And, when you have a time period where it's just gone crazy, look what just happened here. You had another decade, had a bunch, and then a small loss, but big, huge returns, a loss. And I put 15% in 2023. That's kind of an estimate. Okay. I don't know where the year is going to end at. So I know that's somewhat of a vague one there. Maybe it'll be a little bit higher, but regardless, even if it goes up a little bit, it's not changing anything in the scheme of things. In this particular case, it doesn't work at all. So, keep this in mind. If we have returns, depends on when you do retire. And if you do retire in one of those years where it's a down year, or you have a couple in a row, it can really damage how your retirement goes down the road. So, keep all that in mind when you're looking at this stuff. That's why you should have a financial advisor. It's not just so that they can get you a better return or whatever. Most of us have financial tools, and we've been through this before. We can help you get through this. We can walk you through that scenario. So make sure you get somebody that you feel comfortable with, that you trust, that can help you put together a plan that works for you and your situation and your family. Dickey out.